Thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Kyle Rose, CEO and founder of Rook Quality Systems. I've worked in the quality industry going on 20 years now, working in all different types of roles, including quality, regulatory, manufacturing. I started Rook Quality Systems in 2012 and have been working with all types of medical device companies, supporting quality, regulatory consulting all around the world. Through our work at Rook, we have supported NIH, including REDX, as well as supported all types of incubators, accelerators, hospital systems, universities, with their development of new medical technology and really helping them kind of align on a clear path. For that, we also support a lot of bigger established companies as well with their quality and regulatory needs, ensuring that they are compliant, helping them get into new markets and align with new regulations. At Rook, we have an expert team of 35 quality and regulatory consultants, including 13 certified auditors. We provide regulatory guidance for all types of different markets. With our US branch, we also have an APAC branch. We can provide full world support for any of your key markets, as well as any smaller markets that you would be looking to get your device into. We provide tailored quality system solutions, really right size for your device and your stage and type of company. Our foundation is really on efficiency of compliance. So doing everything we can within the scope of the regulations to make your quality and regulatory and clinical processes as efficient as possible. We really believe that efficient systems lead to more compliant systems, and the less heavy documentation you have, the more likely it is to be accurate and complete. We provide full lifecycle support, so everything from early lab R&D all the way through regulatory clearance and ongoing compliance. We have a lot of companies that don't have an internal team, and they use Rook to support all of their post-market quality activities. With this kind of mindset on efficiency and streamlined compliance, we have a lot of case studies and proven track record of faster market entry for both US FDA and other markets as well. High level of some of the file or services we provide. So just basic QMS design and management, outsourced quality control. So kind of your fractional quality manager, quality team. We work a lot with software devices, including monitoring devices, purely SAMD, SIMD devices, helping with everything from early requirement definition to V&V testing, clinical protocols, AI development, PCCP, cybersecurity, all of these key things we support on your software device. Support design and risk files, regulatory support, as I've mentioned, as well as clinical trial support. So that's a brief overview on Rook. Definitely reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to pass it over to Lynn for her introduction. And thanks again, Medmarc, for joining this. I really think this is a great topic to share with our audience as far as the insurance side and what Medmarc can bring to your team.
Thanks, Kyle. So I have over 30 years experience advising clients their insurance needs and risks. I actually started in horse mortality insurance because I grew up as a horse girl. And then I joined Medmarc in 2007 as the manager of marketing development, and I'm now the director of agency and alliances. So, I went from horse mortality to sort of general insurance. I was a producer for many years and was a producer at Kirkton Insurance Agency before I came to Medmarc. We offer products liability, but in scope of my job, I actually go through with startups the coverages that they need to through their life cycle, and that's what I'm going to go through today. So I will turn it over to John to introduce himself.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm John Agello, and I'm Vice President of Business Development and Marketing here at Medmarc. I've been here since 2010. I've held various roles, including underwriting and underwriting management before coming over. I've been in the business over 35 years, started in errors and omissions and directors and officers liability insurance and other specialty lines before moving into products liability for MedTech companies here at Medmarc. I lead the team for business development and for marketing, for agency, and I also handle other roles in terms of leadership here, program management, and most importantly, the reinsurance side of the business as well. So I have a parochial local view of the insurance here, and then also a global view of how the markets are performing and our spot in it. So I'll kick us off. Here's the usual disclaimer we have to put up. And if you can go to the agenda, Lynn and I are going to cover, here we go. We are going to cover a little bit about who Medmarc is and what we do, life cycles in insurance and for the MedTech companies, and things that you're going to want to be asking your broker and carriers for, questions to ask, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about claims and claims handling in the business, how to keep yourself out of trouble, and then we'll take any questions. Thanks. So who are we? Medmarc Insurance is a niche insurance company specializing in products liability insurance and related coverages since 1979. Our insureds include companies really in the human clinical trial stage and emerging growth up to about $10 million in annual revenue. And then from there, we have many clients that are in the middle market stage, and then what I call the billion and up multinational companies. So our book of business, since we were started, really runs the gamut of types of companies. And really our discussion here is really going to be geared toward clinical trial phase and emerging growth companies. Most of our current and former insureds on the book are actually startups and small business. When you look at the volume of business Medmarc sees around the country and around the world, it really is the emerging growth companies and the new products that are out there. So many of our services offered in underwriting, claims handling, and risk management are really dedicated to this important segment of the industry. We were founded by a trade association in 1979 when there was an insurance liability crisis. AdvaMed, the MedTech Association, actually started us. Their membership pooled resources and created what became the insurance company Medmarc. AdvaMed, as many of you may know, but some may not, is a very large trade association that leads the effort to advance medical tech in order to achieve healthier lives and healthier economies around the world. They have over 600 member companies that, again, range from the smallest ones up to the largest. And they really are a lobbying group and a vocal advocate and a common voice for companies making devices around the world, including diagnostics and digital health companies. And they're an advocate at the national, state, and regional industries. If you've attended the MedTech conference in the past or attended this year in Boston, you'll see Medmarc there. We'll have a big presence there, and we encourage you to stop by and chat with us. That would be great. Medmarc was recently purchased earlier this summer by a company called the Doctors Company. And they are very similar to us in what they do, and they actually have a program very similar to ours. So we are merging our books together, so we'll actually have more insureds in the MedTech space as we go through the integration. TDC, we are part of a $2.5 billion organization that is rated A by AM Best. We really respect our roots in the medical technology community, being part of the ecosystem. It's a big part of huge part of what Lynn does and a big part of what I do. In addition to the MedTech conference, you'll see us at various state and regional MedTech events around the country. We participate in other areas such as MedTech Innovator, MedTech Strategist. These are the MedTech Innovator being the world's largest life science accelerator. Resi partnering events. Again, those are early stage investment companies, MedTech strategists, and other similar organizations around the world. We want to be another resource you can use, along with Rook and your insurance brokers, to help you manage your products, liability, risk throughout the company's life cycle. I think that's all I had.
Yep.
Lynn, you could take this.
Yes. I'm ready to go. Okay, so I do want to have a quick disclaimer. All info shared are examples. Please refer to your policy language for exact coverages. So I'm going to walk you through the life cycle of insurance for medical device startups. So while you're raising capital from venture capitals and angel investors, the list goes on, your first purchase is going to be directors and officers coverage. Directors and officers liability runs about $5,000 to $15,000 for $1 million in coverage. Most investors are going to require this coverage before they invest in your company because it protects the personal assets of your directors and officers when they're sued for this alleged wrongful acts in managing this company. Some examples of this, some sort of coverages that it often covers, back to your policy language. If you've exaggerated clinical trial results, whether that's your salespeople or it's directly from the top, that can be a D&O coverage. Failure to comply with FDA rules or HIPAA standards, the misuse of company funds, that can be as granular as they thought you rented a space that was way too expensive and you frivolously spent the money you were given. Failure to comply with workplace laws, for instance, you lay off or fire an employee and they later sue the company for gender discrimination. Or theft of intellectual property. If another company thinks your product is derivative of theirs, they may file suit, and that can come under your director's office as well. I actually recommend you get this coverage before you're speaking to the venture capital groups and angel investors, because it shows proper due diligence and that you're on top of how to move your company forward. So next slide, please. So the next phase is renting a location or entering an incubator space. Once you're actually out of your garage or university, you're renting a location and you'll need a business owner's policy. It's typically called a BOP in the industry. And for a small company, it's about $800 a year. I will say that $800 is really sort of based on very minimal business personal property. You're not having a ton of lab equipment that costs a lot. And so the property coverage is your desk, computers, lab equipment, et cetera. And so that $800 a year is based on a very small startup. And a lot of times in your incubator, they own a lot of that for you. So you really have minimal equipment of your own. And your premises liability is coverage for the location you're renting. Also covers you at booth space at conferences against slip and fall. Once you're in the hospital space, whether it's your clinical trial or product on the market, if you are just standing there talking to somebody and you set a notebook on the ground and someone trips on it, that is now your premises, and it covers you there as well. And some other coverages that you might want to think about to make sure that's in your BOP. Business income or business interruption, it's the same thing. It's called different things at different companies. If you have a physical property loss, that it can pay your salaries, lost revenue, and rent. And if your place is completely destroyed, it'll actually help you move to the new location. But that's based off a property claim. Your research animals, you want to make sure your policy covers everything from single cell organisms all the way up to primates, because you may think I'm only doing a canine model, but you may sort of have to take a step back and use a single cell research. And then now, if you've bought a policy that only covers furry animals, you no longer have coverage that single cell. And frankly, the biggest claim I've ever seen on this was a single cell organism. They had a refrigerator that didn't have an alarm on it. Always have an alarm on your refrigerator that goes to an alarm company. So no one can go, it's an alarm. It's, and the contractor was in there doing some work, unplugged the refrigerator on a Friday afternoon, did whatever they did, didn't plug the refrigerator back in, left for the weekend, came back, and all of their specimens were dead. It was an enormous claim because they had put a ton of work into these specimens. So you do put an alarm on your refrigerator with an alarm company monitoring it, and then make sure your research animals are covering single cells. So FDA missed milestones. This coverage isn't used a lot, but when it is, it's necessary for these companies. Your venture capitalist often says, or your investor often says that when you get to a certain level, we'll give you this much money. And if you miss that milestone for whatever reason, this will help you sort of bridge that gap until you hit that FDA milestone and your next tranche of funding comes in. And then another thing you need to think about is that, if an employee is installing medical equipment at a hospital and they set something down or break something while they're there, like an X-ray machine, it will cover. That's also included on your BOP while they're, the employee is sort of accidentally damaging somebody else's property. Your next coverage you're going to buy is hired and non-owned auto. This is before you own an auto. A corporate auto. When you do in a corporate auto, that's regular commercial auto. But this sometimes be added to the BOP. It's more frequently now a separate policy. And it's about $250 a year, unless you have a ton of employees that are running lots of, driving their personal autos to and from sales events. So it protects the company for liability for personal and rental cars. It goes over the underlying personal insurance. So let's say you have an employee that goes to the post office on a work errand, and they unfortunately cause an accident. The attorney that gets a hold of that is going to say, Wow, you were on a work errand. I'm going to sue the company as well, not just you for driving. And so once that your employee's personal insurance is exhausted, they hire non-owned auto because it's a non-owned auto to the company. It's not a, and then the hired car coverage is for your liability only. If you do rent a lot of cars, you might want to look into hired car physical damage coverage for that. So then you're probably going to need to buy work comp, and that depends on the states as to when you're going to have to purchase that. It's about $1,000 a year. And the rates are different for different job duties. Like a clerical is very inexpensive to insure because they assume that you're driving to an office or staying at home now, and you're working all day long at a desk, which is not super risky. Though I will say the worst claim I've ever seen on work comp was a clerical person who stood up on a desk, on a chair that was not only rolly, it was also turny, and to get something out of the top. And the people that saw it, the woman was horribly injured, saw it, said she, flew like a superhero from it. I don't really know what happened. She was horribly injured. And so even though that's the lowest rated employee, that was the worst claim I've ever seen. And then like your salespeople that are driving from office to office have a little higher work comp rate. Your loading dock people are even a little higher. But for your typical startup, it's about $1,000 a year. And then once you have employees, in some states, you're an employee of the corporation. Like, I know it's not a state, but the District of Columbia, for example, they view everyone as an employee of the corporation. So if you start a corporation in DC and you are the only one working there, even though you own the corporation, you're considered an employee in DC and you're required to buy work comp for that one person. In Virginia, it's 3 employees, but you can exclude the corporate officers. So you can have 4 corporate officers and 2 employees, and you're not required to have it. However, if one of those employees gets injured, they are no longer now limited to the statutory limit set by for their injury set by the state that you're at, whatever state you're in. They all have their own statutory limits. They can actually sue you in open court. And so it's a not a huge premium to pay to give you peace of mind that someone, there's limits to how much they can sue you for. And then of course there is employer liability and built into that if they say you've had an unsafe workplace or something like that. So then the next slide. So there are some carriers that offer a clinical trial liability policy, and then you finish your clinical trial, yay, and you start selling your product, and it's not covered under that. So I recommend you go ahead and buy a product liability policy that includes clinical trial liability. They're frankly priced the same, so you're getting more for your money because it's just contemplating the fact that you're going to start selling your product at some point. This covers bodily injury and property damage that are allegedly caused by your product. We do recommend you buy a US policy, even if you're running trials outside the US, and I'm going to tell you why. So most actually foreign countries now have decided that you also need to purchase a policy in their country written by a carrier that has bricks and mortar in that country. And those policies tend to be very narrow in scope, and in developing companies, very low limits. So those narrow in scope coverages, you can have a claim that is outside of their policy, but within, for instance, Medmarc's broad policy. Medmarc will drop down and cover it just like it was a regular policy. There was not that other coverage there. Or in these developing nations that have very low limits required, we will go above that. One of the limitations that most of these, every country is different. Most of these countries, when you buy that local policy, it is only covering that country and countries that have a land border with it. And we all know medical devices and people move. So you can be in, let's say, Nigeria and running a trial, and then one of those people that was in your trial moves to France. If you only have the local policy, you now no longer have coverage if that person files claim in France. If you have a Medmarc or a good global policy, they will then pick up that coverage for that person in France. So you really need to be careful about, a lot of people think, oh, I can save money by only buying the local policy. And yeah, you're saving money, but you might be costing your company down the road. And then cyber coverage. It's about $1,500 to $7,000 a year. It's needed if your product or company has software embedded in it or collects personal identifying information, or probably more commonly personal health information. It covers unauthorized access to malware affecting your device's connectivity. If you collect protected health information and it's compromised, that's where the coverage comes in. And I'm sure if you do have that, you should have a consultant help you with making sure that your cyber coverage, not only your cyber coverages correctly, but you are doing everything you can to prevent and have a good firewall on that. The next slide, please. So now you have product on the market. Congratulations, you've made it. So you need to go through with your carrier and your broker and evaluate the limits on every single coverage so that they grow with your company. Now, you should have been doing this all along, but I know that insurance is the last thing everybody thinks of. So at least do it now. You probably need to increase your liability. You probably need to increase the business personal property you have. If you're hiring a ton of employees, work comp policies are what's called audited. So at the end of the policy year, you'll fill out what your actual payrolls were, and then those premiums are due within 30 days. If you are hiring a bunch of employees and know your work comp premium is going to be much higher, I think it's better to endorse the policy part way through, so then you can maybe get on a payment plan and you're not hit with your renewal premium and your audit premium all at once. It can be really devastating to a company if they've really ramped up their employees. If you want to go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk some things to look for when you're buying products liability. So you want to have true worldwide coverage. We touched on this earlier, but many US-based companies say they have worldwide coverage, but I say it's not true worldwide coverage because their policy requires the claim to be brought back to the United States. That's not super easy if someone is claiming, in Eastern Europe, and they're like, why would I bring my claim back to the US? If you're with Medmarc, we have true worldwide coverage. We will defend you in that country, except for our US federally prohibited by law. Does your policy have any excluded products or automatically on your policy, which may be included in my products? I understand that people do not read insurance policies. You may read it the first year. You're excused from reading the other years. I recommend you read it. However, but I know you're not going to. So if you have a page and a half of excluded products that they add to every couple of years, are you going to read that policy and find out if an excluded product is either a part of your product or your entire product? So I really think that's a selling point of Medmarc, is that we don't automatically exclude. We don't have that long list of exclusions that can sort of bite you if it turns out a portion of your product or your entire product is on that list. Do you have dedicated life science claim representatives? So most claims representatives are put in a few buckets. Property coverage is one, casualty is another. Casualty claims representatives oftentimes will be doing work comp, auto, liability coverages, and now they're handling their very first life science claim. Do you want to, while you're going through your deductible or self-insured retention or even your limit, you're teaching them they're learning how to handle your life science claim. When you're with a company like Medmarc that has dedicated life science claims representatives, they understand your science, they understand your FDA regulatory issues. And so they're not learning how to handle your claim while you're doing it, because frankly, they're not, there's auto claims every day and there's not many of these. So you really want to have a company that has dedicated life science claims representatives. Move to the next slide. And this is up to John now. You're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Lynn. I hate to do it, but let's talk about claims a little bit. So as you can imagine, we've seen a lot of claims since 1979, and we've seen over 25,000 of them. They range across all facets of the MedTech industry. They include everything from orthopedics and implants to diagnostics, combination products. We write a fair share of drug and pharmaceutical business. And so we see claims from human clinical trial phase and again, all the way up through the multinational companies. I will say, though, that they are rare for this industry and for certainly the buyers of insurance through Medmarc over our history. They are rare. For most of the MedTech industry, it's really more of what we call a severity exposure than frequency. So while there may not be a lot of claims out there, like slip and falls or auto accidents, when they do happen, they tend to have higher payouts and higher defense costs. Large claims for companies, and again, I'm just going to talk about companies that are small. Large claims for companies under 10 million in revenue can run well over $1 million and frequently average between 2 and 3.5 million, depending on the company, the product, and the fact pattern. So, again, you're into the mid 7 digits in this business, and that includes the legal fees and expenses. For clinical trial stage companies, the averages are lower. They're between 1.5, and 2.7, 2.8 million, to give you an idea about where they are. But there are claims in both areas that exceed those averages, and we have paid what we call limits losses on these as well. Our capacity, just so you know, when we talk about insurance limits, Medmarc's is $10 million, and we do have quite a number of insureds that buy that much. But really for companies that are in the small middle market space, we're really seeing limits between 2 and 5 million for a lot of those companies. When we talk about handling these claims, the attorneys that we use, we have in-house claims handlers. Again, Medmarc's a niche company. All we do is handle MedTech related claims, but we do use attorneys in our defense panel that are specialists in handling products liability defense. They specialize handling mass torts and class actions. They really have focus in what people on this call are doing. And those are the attorneys that we're going to use around the world to help defend you in the event that something gets to court. If you can go to the next slide. Again, I talked a little bit about our claims handling internally. You want an insurance company that, again, is focused on this niche of business. We're handling claims in-house, so it's our own folks. Then we use our attorneys when necessary, and from first dollar. So we want to handle the claim the minute you get it and send it to us. We want to start the working with you, and we want to start working on the defense right away. There's reasons for that. Specifically, you have a deductible. We want to keep our expenses low for you and for us. We don't want to be using companies that are going to be using much higher expenses than we think we can get. We don't want to be using companies that have a learning curve. We don't want to be training attorneys on how to handle products liability for med device companies on our dime and on your dime. When I say no TPA, those are third-party administrators. There are some great third-party administrators out there. These are companies that handle claims on behalf of insurance companies. But you really want that, if you're using a TPA, to have that claims handling person really be focused on and experienced in life sciences type related exposures. And again, to keep our costs down, we're using dedicated national vendors throughout the legal process to keep the overall spend down. Why does specialization matter? Well, again, this is not your run-of-the-mill court case. This is not your run-of-the-mill claim. Things can run quickly into the hundreds of thousands and into the millions of dollars. And so you want to have companies that have specific defenses used, including preemption, learned intermediary. These are things that the attorneys use in order to defend. You want to limit or keep away any media attention. You don't want the public to be thinking that your products are unsafe. You don't want product recalls to occur. And when they do occur, you want them to be managed properly. So again, it's really all about safety, and it's really about making sure that we're on top of things in the beginning. And the reason I bring this up is, while small companies really don't have a great exposure to class actions, the medical tech industries really do have exposure to class actions. They are very common in MedTech. Many large companies have tens of thousands and sometimes millions of devices or products out in the market. If something happens there and claims start to come in, they can, with AI and with law firms, these claims can be aggregated, and the next thing you know, you've got a class action on your hands. According to Carlton Field's class action survey, over the past 15 years, they've increased in both volume and complexity. Our companies are anticipating a sharp rise in class actions, and in some respects, generative AI is behind that for different reasons. Corporate legal spending defending these have grown from $2.5 billion in 2018 to over $4.5 billion last year. So again, the expenses are increasing, and insurance companies are really working hard to manage those numbers. You've got a target on your back. I like to tell people one-on-one, when you're in the MedTech space, the professional trial bar, the professional plaintiffs bar, they've got MedTech in their sights. They're creative and they're very well funded. And I will tell you that settlements are harder to get these days. A lot of the litigation in this space is third-party funded. This is an arrangement where outside vendors and funders can pay for legal costs and expenses in exchange for a percentage of the recovery. And so it's one of the reasons why settlements can be tougher to get. You've got people in there that really want to see claims go to the very end to try to get the highest amount of pay. So that's really all I had on that, on claims. You can go ahead, Devin.
Okay, so I'm going to go through and sort of hopefully tell you how to keep yourself out of court. So the first thing you want to do is benchmark your competitors. Are you meeting or bettering what they're doing? Are they using safeguards that you decided not to employ? Is there a good reason? And then you need to also document why you're not doing that, because you are judged. Not only are you judged by what are you meeting FDA regulations, but industry standard, which can actually be, much more than the FDA standard. So you need to rely on your carrier. Your insurance carrier can provide guidance on regulatory strategy and look at risk shifting and contracts. I always say you want to take on your risk, no one else's. And certainly, like in your CRO and your hospital contracts, they can transfer their risk onto you, and you don't want that to happen. You want to make sure you're only taking your risk and they're only taking theirs. So in our risk management department, they do site visits and evaluate risk management practices and give suggestion based on the years of claim handling in life sciences space. So I do want to take a moment and brag about our risk management department. They will go through, if you're a client of ours, they're not your attorney, they're a attorney, but they can advise you on your contracts, on your informed consent, make sure all of that is properly risk management to try to limit how much, how much product liability you have out there. And then you also want to craft informed consent documents. The informed consent document should be written in a clear manner that's easily understood by a layperson. I've seen some of these that are written and you almost need a PhD to read them, and they have to really sort of dial that back so that, because the people that are taking your product are not experts in your product. Are they doing the informed consent on video if they have proof of exactly what questions were asked and how they were answered? And then sort of the corollary to that is when you have commercial products, you need to also craft your instructions and warnings very carefully. And our risk management department can sort of advise you on that. And then hopefully when you actually, with your contracts and other things, when you're actually going to your attorney to get it written, you can save a little money because our risk management department has helped you with that. We always say that the FDA products liability, if you're FDA approved, that's sort of the floor of products liability. And getting you to the ceiling is the goal, but we really want you to be somewhere in the room. That your product's liability as your risk management is as robust as it can be. Next slide, please. You want to police your partners. You want to ensure that your additional insureds aren't putting you at risk. Back to your contracts. Contracts can transfer risk, and it can be very dangerous for you. You also want to make sure that you have contracts with everyone in your supply chain, and they have proper indemnification, and they have their own U.S.-based products liability as well. If you're using a contract manufacturer in another country, you really want them to have a U.S.-based products liability. It's just much easier if there's a problem. If your contract manufacturer manufactures something incorrectly, it's much easier to deal that here in the U.S. You also want to ensure that your clinical trial sites and investigators are assuming responsibility of the actions of their own people. You want to go overboard on safety and documentation. Document your decision making back to if you're not doing something that other products in your sort of niche are doing, you want to actually have why you aren't doing that and why that's a better idea for you. So you can defend your actions in a way that make you look most credible. You may not be able to avoid a lawsuit, but you're going to be in a much better situation if everything's documented as to why you made all these decisions. You want to heighten your focus on product safety. So it used to be that juries, if you had FDA adhered to FDA regulations and obtained your approval, they took a very great view of that. Currently, jurors view FDA approval as a basic safety benchmark. So you really back to that's the floor of products liability. And risk management, you really need to be in the room somewhere. And so we can help you do that through our risk management department and through your experienced broker, which I will talk about in just a second. Next slide, please. So here's 6 things. Some of them are reviews, some of them are new. So you want to select a broker and carrier with expertise in MedTech and life sciences. If you don't have a broker, we can help you find an experienced life science broker. They, again, since they're experienced, they understand FDA pressures, they understand what coverages, they might think of something that you haven't thought of that you need to cover. If you really want to use your broker down the street, that's a friend that you use them for everything else. Medmarc, there's a little plug for Medmarc, will actually train that broker and go through our policy with them so that they are more comfortable selling that and making sure you're covered correctly. Again, you also want to cover carrier with expertise in medtech and life sciences for the same reasons. You really want people that have dedicated underwriters and dedicated claims representatives that John and I both spoke about earlier. You want to obtain coverage to the appropriate people, sites, and markets. If you have your experienced broker with you, they will make sure and sort of review it at least every couple of years, but hopefully annually on what you're doing if you're growing rapidly. Ensure that trial protocols are solid and that everyone is involved is adhering to them. I actually had a protocol just last week that mentioned some side effects that the informed consent did not. And so luckily the underwriter caught that before anything had gone out. And so this is something we did as a service to our not client yet, but our soon to be client, that you needed to add these things to the informed consent because you really don't want, because that's if there were a problem and your protocol said this could be a side effect and the informed consent could not, it shows that your due diligence on your product's liability is not where it should be. So you want to make sure, again, that your informed consents are truly informed and that there are no red flags, such as inordinately high compensation for trial participants. Document your decisions, document, especially those related to safety, and inform your carrier if issues arise. We're here to help you, not here to string you up. So please remember that we're supposed to be a partnership, not an adversarial partnership. So I think that is back to John.
No, it's back to
But I
Kyle.
think it's back to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John Lynn. Lots of great information. And, really great to hear from our perspective of how all this really ties back to kind of the quality and regulatory work that we're pushing and advising companies on and really coaching and teaching them on as well, right? That all of this work that you're doing has to be documented, it has to be related to patient safety. You have to have tests proving it's safe. It's not really just, we think it's safe, I'm a doctor. You have to have all of that traceability, documentation trail, everything. So very much aligns with what you guys are saying as well. I think one thing that we see really is kind of this idea of like, oh, clearance, we're good. FDA said we're good to sell, but that doesn't mean your job is done or that you're free from any potential complaints or potential litigation issues. It's really the starting point. Now you are deemed to be as safe and effective as another device in the market, but you still have to maintain all of your quality, your testing, your QC, all of your controls. Any changes have to go back through the same process of making sure that it is safe, it's been validated, it aligns with the FDA regulation. So the FDA regulator kind of high level, did you follow the compliant process? Do you meet the minimum requirements of safety and effectiveness compared to similar devices on the market? And the underwriter is kind of similar thing of like, what does this process predict about your future loss or what you've done to set this up? And then, you would potentially have to defend this in the event of a complaint or some sort of litigation. So really making sure you have all of this paperwork in place as you're moving through the process. I really like how you guys presented that, the earlier you start with this, the better. I think that's something we try to get to our companies as well, is the earlier you kind of align of this is a medical device and it's going to have different requirements than a consumer product, right? And we're going to have to both mirror that in our quality and our regulatory documentation, but also in our insurance policies and contracts with our suppliers and CROs and things like that as well. I think one thing that we also see a lot is that companies don't realize that they don't actually get audited by the FDA prior to getting their device on the market, right? So that audit process in the FDA typically happens after you've been selling your device for a few years. So it's very likely, and we've seen countless times where they don't have a set quality system or they don't have a formal design control process, even though they have a clearance with the FDA, right? So really making sure that you align on getting all of this documentation in place because you will potentially have to defend it, and that's the way to do it once any issues arise. So kind of what underwriters look for, and this aligns a lot with, what regulators look for, what, potential partners, acquirers, investors look for as well. So the big part is your design controls, your medical device file, your technical file, making sure that everything that has been documented in this process, so everything from your initial user needs, design inputs, requirements, all of these things are documented, reviewed, signed off, traceable, and lead to formal testing showing that the product does what you say it does, right? That's one of the things that has to be done throughout this process is showing the full level of traceability from the initial requirements of what you want this product to do to the final verification and validation testing showing it meets the requirements. The risk management file is a big aspect of this as well. So aligning your risk with the design as well as the high level risk of your product. So within the scope of the FDA, there's class one, two, and three risk, class three being highest, class one being lowest. But there are still things that could happen with a class one device that could result in a claim or a lawsuit or something like that. So you still need to have this information documented. It should be aligned with the risk of your product, but you still need to maintain this risk management file, have it reviewed, have it signed off, and also update it as you get more data around your device. Once you actually get your product on the market, a lot of new people will be using it who aren't as familiar with your team, right? So there's things that happen where they don't follow the instructions or they don't use it correctly, use it off label, and those are all chances for risk, right? And as you get more information and more feedback from your users, you need to update that information in your risk file, address it, right? If something comes, and that is when you notify your potential insurance holder. But it is something you also need to look at. Do we need to update the design? Do we need to update the informed consent, update the IFU, things like that to make sure we are capturing all these potential risk, potential misuse opportunities with the product as well. Complaints and CAPAs are big and I think huge on the scope of the underwriting team as well, right? So these are really your documentation of what happens when something goes wrong. So complaints are more on the outgoing feedback if somebody's using your product, it's defective, something breaks, there's potential injury with the product, and those have to be thoroughly documented, investigated, and remediated within the scope of your quality system. So these are the two areas that FDA really focuses on when they're doing an audit, are the complaint and CAPA process. The CAPA process is your corrective and preventive action. So if something happens within the scope of your device, and it could be before it's even released, so some manufacturing defect, potentially using a supplier that wasn't approved, using people that weren't trained to build and test the product, all of these things are potential corrective actions that need to be fixed, formally documented, assign a root cause for these issues, and then move through the documentation process to show that we created a new process or fixed this issue, and then we also verified it was effective, right? So these are two of the key records within the scope of your quality system that need to be captured, maintained for any of these issues. And a lot of times they can go together. You can get a complaint, and then you look back at your design or your process and you decide to open a CAPA to close out and fix that issue. So just they're not one off, they also work together a lot as well. Um, Lynn mentioned supplier controls a good bit and really, making sure that your contracts and your agreements with your suppliers um, cover both the insurance and liability scope. But there's also the idea of that you have to make sure they're providing the product that you signed up for, right? So you have to define that they have quality systems in place on their side as well. You need to likely audit your suppliers to make sure they're manufacturing your product to your specifications or your components. Just because it's outsourced work doesn't mean it's outsourced liability. And that's the same with the regulatory scope as well. We have companies that are purely virtual companies. They don't ever see or touch the product that they own a regulatory submission and filing for, but they still own all of that regulatory liability as well as insurance liability as well, right? So you need to make sure that you have complete control of your suppliers and it's not just a one-time checkbox. Oh, we checked them off 4 years ago. They were good then. They've had employee turnover. They've had new suppliers as well. It's an ongoing evaluation process to make sure that you are checking on your suppliers annually. They're keeping up their side of it. If they have ISO certification, they have FDA registration, but also going and doing audits and working with them to make sure they're providing high quality materials, high quality devices to you as well. Labeling and intended use claims. So this is another big part of it. So making sure that labeling and intended use aligns with your regulatory clearance and that any of the claims stay inside that indication as well. I think this is an area where we're always seeing companies and specifically the sales and marketing team of these med device companies wanting to push the envelope. Say, oh, we think it can do this too. Or if we had this claim, we'd sell a lot more. And like, yeah, we understand that, but it's also very much tied to what our regulatory clearance is. We can add new claims, but likely that requires new testing, new clinical study, new regulatory submissions, right? So really aligning on your claims and staying within that prior to updating any marketing or sales or things like that. On the post-market surveillance and audit history side, make sure you are maintaining correct files, meeting the regulations for this. Companies need to do an internal audit at least once per year. Post-market surveillance includes things like complaints, adverse events, customer feedback. So always being on top of your post-market surveillance, getting your feedback, responding to that, updating your risk files, opening CAPAs and complaints as needed related to that. The EU has also added additional regulations around post-market follow-up, post-market clinical follow-up, post-market surveillance. So making sure that if you are selling in EU as well, that you're maintaining those records. A lot of times, if you have product in multiple countries, if something happens to a user or patient in the US, you still likely need to notify the other countries of this potential complaint or adverse event as well. So just making sure that if you have an international scope for your product, that you're meeting all of those regulations and notifying the other bodies as well. What kind of document decision making means relative to kind of the quality system and your work with your insurance agency. So really aligning on, why we made this decision and how we properly document it. So this could be tied to, any potential changes in, we want to have additional claims, we want to have more of a diagnosis than providing, a score for a physician to interpret. So a lot of times companies go in with an initial claim or use case, but then want to have a carry-on claim down the road or collect additional data and have additional documentation around that. So as you're going through the process of either updating your claims or improving your device, you have to document all of that as well. Within the scope of potential defects, you have to have an internal quality system that captures everything that happened when you identified a design defect or a manufacturing defect, how you went through the process of correcting the initial issues, how to correct any potential problems down the road, as well as what you did with the initial scope of product. So if there was some that were already released, do you need to do a recall or some sort of post-market update or follow-up with the people actually using it? So having all of that information documented is critical both for your audits, but also for any potential insurance or court proceedings to make sure you have this full documentation audit trail of everything that was done throughout the process. Manufacturing defects as well fall in this. So when you're manufacturing or your contract manufacturer is building your product, there's a lot of paperwork around what materials they're using, who built it, how were they trained, any specific equipment that was used, how it was calibrated and qualified and validated, high level process risk, high level process validation. All of these things are really your evidence that you are building your product and manufacturing your product in line with FDA, good manufacturing practices, all of these things. So any defects or any issues need to be captured and need to look back at all of the historical records you've done to set up this process to make sure it's compliant. If you change things, that follows the whole trail of getting that reviewed, approved, new process validation, new employee training, all of these things as well, kind of align with the process of following your quality system, but making sure it's all documented throughout the process and you have clear decision making on why you made these decisions and how it's going to fix or prevent this defect in the future. Failure to warn is more on the kind of labeling IFU marketing side. So making sure that you have this captured in your process as well, and if there are any issues, that you properly document this. One thing that we've seen with companies is once you get your product on the market and you get some of those first few complaints or feedback, or if it's a high risk product, potentially adverse events, it's very critical that you thoroughly document that information in your quality system, and you dive into everything that was done in the design verification validation stage, but also everything that was done in the manufacturing stage. Those records are super critical for your first audits, insurance compliance, for any future investment, acquisition, things like that. Those first few complaint records, feedback records, adverse events are going to be super critical for the success of your company. So making sure that you have a thorough documentation process. A lot of times companies are using Rook employees, Rook experts to help them through that. This is a very critical stage of your company of getting that first feedback, and make sure you're documenting it correctly in your quality system. Aligned with kind of this process is the quality life cycle and how it aligns with the insurance life cycle. So as you're starting to kind of identify and work through R&D, build your device, get through first design controls and first employees onto trials and market, there's different things that need to be captured. I think the Medmarc team did a great job of kind of explaining in different stages what you might need and how it might grow and scale as you get more employees, or as you're going to hospitals to install this equipment, how kind of different insurance policies might need to be added. The same thing aligns with the quality and regulatory life cycle. So really putting that framework in place as you're starting to identify that you're developing a medical device or a medical device software. We tell companies, we work with a lot of very early stage companies, one or two people, early academic, that the sooner you start this quality process, the better it is for the outcome of your company. And it might be that you realize earlier that you need to pivot, or make a design tweak, or change the intended use, or change the initial market. But the sooner you start that, the clearer it is that you have all this documented. You can move faster towards getting your clinical trial or your regulatory submission. And I think that aligns very much with what Medmarc presented as well. The sooner you start this process, the better it is for you down the road, both on a liability perspective, but also as investors and acquirers are looking at you, showing that you have all this in place. As you go through design control and first hire, stuff like that, making sure you're capturing all your design decisions, all your testing decisions, all your material selection things, all that, to make sure it's aligned with FDA regulations and best practices, state of the art, things like that. Clinical trials can also be a big potential risk for your company, your product. So making sure you have everything in place through that. You have a CRO and you have a set agreement with them. And then once you're on the market, it's an ongoing process as well to make sure you're handling feedback, responding, and investigating properly. Protecting innovation. So this is kind of the last slide before we get to questions. So make sure that you have a shared risk pool within the scope of your product. So it's not just you, there's other products similar on the market that have a similar risk profile. So part of post-market surveillance is also looking at other similar products on the market and seeing if they had a failure, if they had a recall, and reviewing your product to see if the same thing could happen. So making sure that you're always being proactive with your post-market surveillance and review, making sure that you're meeting quality and regulatory requirements, making sure you're keeping up with whatever the latest testing is as well. So all these things align with kind of shared regulatory climate, shared risk, and shared credibility relative to your device and your product. So just kind of wrapping up. So quality systems help prevent losses, and insurance helps organizations survive them. Strongest medtech companies invest in both. Really grateful for Medmarc being able to join today. On the Rook side, we have a lot of other case studies and blogs and tools you can research on our website, so feel free to do that. Do want to open up for any questions that came through. Devin did mention in the chat that there is a kind of playbook on how The right liability insurance can protect your life science business, so definitely make sure you get that as well. I did have some questions that came up kind of as I was listening in to the presentation from the Medmarc side is like as a startup, what is the kind of the first step of them getting involved with Medmarc? Is there a lot of documentation they need to have on their side to get a proper quote? Going through insurance on my side before for cyber and stuff like that. I know that can be a lot of forms and information. It can be overwhelming for an early stage company. So what is that process of really getting started with Medmarc for like a startup medical device?
Go
Okay.
ahead, Lynn.
Okay, so we do have an application that I always warn people looks long, but it's not really, because every state has their own disclaimers. That's 2 pages, and an application for everyone. So if you're a startup and you're a clinical trial, you're only going to fill out the sort of general section, the clinical trial section. You're going to skip the product of the market and the contract manufacturer section. So you need an application, and if you're doing a clinical trial, we'll need your informed consent and your protocol because we do look through those. And then if you are a product on the market, again, you only fill out those parts, and then we'll might have your contracts with your suppliers or distributors, depending on how you're selling your product. We'll need those as well to look at those. And then, of course, if you ask for help with those on the risk management, can help them as well.
Got it. And then I was actually at a conference earlier this week that had a lot of like university-based startups where they're still kind of tied to university. There was some discussion on tech transfer and how the university protects some of them during that stage. How does insurance apply if you're still kind of an academic startup? Does the university still cover some of that insurance and liability? Do they still need Medmark at that stage? How does that work?
It is bespoke for every single university. There's
Okay.
not one answer. Some of them envelop you and take care of you until you are off on your own. Other ones don't want the liability. We even have some universities that buy coverage clinical trial while you're still sort of enveloped in it. Other ones you are just off on your own, and peace be with you. So that's that's where you need the insurance professional to come in and look at what you're doing to
Okay.
help you with it.
So it'd be good, kind of check with your university, see what you have, and then also
Right,
check with Medmark to see
right.
if what they provide is enough, right? Because they might provide a
Mm-hmm.
portion of it, but if you're doing
Mm-hmm.
a lot of R&D with some, grad students in your lab, then it might not be enough. And especially as you're
Right.
getting closer to a clinical trial, I can see that would make some sense as well. You also mentioned, Lynn, that, kind of the contract review of your contract manufacturers, your CRO, potential design firms. Is that something that Medmark helps with as far as reviewing those contracts for clients, or is it something that they need a legal representative? I know Rook does some contract review, but it's more within our scope of like quality and regulatory
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities. How does Medmark kind of manage that contract review to make sure they do have, the right stuff in there?
So you do need your own legal representative. However, we're helping sort of craft that with you. Our risk management department, they're not your attorney, so there's no client attorney privilege, and they're not going to, you're not going to go to them and go, "Hey, can you write me this contract?" You'll bring a contract that you've been given by someone. They can redline it and talk to you about some things you might want to look out for, and then you go to your attorney to actually get the language crafted.
Okay. Sounds good. Those were all my questions. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we have time for one more audience question. Let me see
Mm-hmm.
if I can get it on from Adam. So it says, once commercialized, does insurance cover failure to register with state boards of pharmacy, secretaries of state, sales and income tax authorities, etc.? Or is the manufacturer out on a limb? And I think, Lynn, that might be going to you.
Yeah, so that's possibly D&O depending on which coverage form you have, but they're probably going to only cover defense costs for that, not actual liability for that. So that's another one of those things that if that's something you're concerned about, that you need to make sure that you have that covered built into your D&O. But I'm not familiar with everyone's D&O form, but I do believe it is in some.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I know we're at time, so I just want to thank you, Adam, for that great question and all the great questions, Kyle. And of course, thank you, Lynn, John, and Kyle, for sharing your expertise today. I learned a lot, and I will not be standing on my office chair. I can tell you that, Lynn. So all resources, including the handout from today's webinar, will be in your inbox by the end of day tomorrow. If you'd like to learn more about Rook quality systems and how we can support your quality and regulatory needs, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to help you out. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, and I hope you all have a great day.